Welcome, everyone. Let's jump right in. We're looking at a fascinating divergence between two resurrection accounts, Matthew's and Luke's.
Yeah, it's really intriguing, especially how Luke completely reconfigures the scene.
Exactly. In Matthew, we've got the disciples meeting the risen Jesus on a mountain in Galilee, but Luke takes a very, different approach. He shifts everything to Jerusalem.
Yep.
It almost feels like Luke is rewriting the emotional core of the whole story.
So essentially, it's as if Luke was aiming for a different narrative about the resurrection, right?
Right. Luke not only changes the geography, but also adds or even invents scenes that we don't see in Matthew. Instead of a remote mountain setting, Luke grounds it in the urban center of Jerusalem, which is kind of, like making the resurrection more accessible and even institutionalized.
And that shift is loaded with theological implications. I mean, by moving to Jerusalem, Luke seems to be rebranding the resurrection story into something more politically acceptable to the empire.
Yes, absolutely. Scholars like Raymond E. and Dominic Crossan have noted that Luke was, in a way, domesticating the story. He's moving away from the wild, almost chaotic visions of early resurrection narratives into something that aligns with a more unified, city-based church.
Which makes me wonder, is Luke here being like an evangelist or more like an editor with a specific political agenda?
That's a great question. There's a lot of debate over that. Some scholars, like Richard Purvo and Joseph Tyson, suggest that Luke's resurrection narrative, with the subsequent acts, serves as a defense of the church to demonstrate that it wasn't just a quixotic Jewish sect but a well-ordered movement, tightly linked to the Roman imperial structure.
Yeah, I get that. So by placing the resurrection in Jerusalem, Luke is making it more verifiable in a historical and geographical sense, right?
Precisely. Luke's narrative is almost like a blueprint for creating an origin story that's, Rome-friendly. Take, for example, the scene where Jesus eats fish. That little detail isn't just about food. It's a deliberate effort to prove, in a very pragmatic way, that Jesus isn't a ghost. It reinforces that Jesus is real and tangible.
I find that really interesting because it contrasts sharply with Matthew's portrayal, where the mystical and miraculous aspects seem to be front and center.
Yeah, exactly. In Matthew, the appearances of Jesus, like meeting on the mountain, maintain a kind of elevated, even otherworldly tone. Luke takes a more grounded approach. He wants the narrative to resonate with a broader audience that might have been skeptical of apocalyptic claims.
And that shift definitely marks a turning point in how resurrection was used to legitimize the church's authority.
Right. It's like Luke is saying, look, the faith isn't about chasing visions or living in fear of an apocalypse. It's about establishing order and continuity. The New Jerusalem becomes, a sort of new epicenter for the faith.
Absolutely. However, I've got to ask, doesn't that risk sanitizing a very transformative event? I mean, by downplaying the chaotic and mystical elements, aren't we losing something essential about the resurrection experience?
That's a fair critique. It's almost like Luke is swinging the pendulum too far in the direction of structure and political order. But consider that at the time the church was growing and fracturing. Luke needed a narrative that could support practical, unified doctrine.
So, his rewrite, as drastic as it is, was also a kind of remedy for the turbulent early church?
Exactly. Luke's version was meant to, in a sense, suppress the apocalyptic frenzy that accompanied early resurrection faith. Instead, it promotes a version of Christianity that's orderly, grounded in the political and geographical reality of Jerusalem. It's like he was ironing out the wrinkles in the early narratives.
And it's really clever when you think about it. By anchoring the story in Jerusalem, he not only creates continuity with Jewish tradition, but also aligns the emerging faith with the power structures of the empire.
Right, exactly. That move has profound implications. Luke's Jesus is calm, rational, almost like a counter to the more mystical, visionary portrayals. He even opens the disciples' eyes to the scriptures to confirm his identity. It makes the resurrection something you can almost verify with your own eyes.
Yep. And what about that final ascension scene in Luke 24? That's so distinct. It's not just about resurrection. It's about handing over authority to the apostles in a very dramatic, almost theatrical way.
Right. The ascension scene is a whole new layer in Luke's narrative. It neatly marks an end to Jesus' earthly ties and the beginning of what scholars describe as salvation history in 3 acts: Israel, Jesus,
Yeah, it really
and
does.
then the church. This scene isn't in Matthew or Mark, which tells us a lot about Luke's agenda.
So in a way, Luke is transforming a chaotic miracle into a legitimizing event for the institutional church.
Absolutely. That's the heart of it. Luke's rewrite turns the resurrection into a narrative that not only supports a unified church, but one that is, key word, empire-friendly. It basically shifts the narrative focus from a rural, almost nomadic experience to one centralized in an urban, politically significant setting.
And it almost seems like Luke is correcting or even suppressing some elements found in Matthew's account, isn't it?
Yes, it does appear that way. While Matthew's account embraces the more visionary and even, unsettling aspects of the resurrection, Luke chooses to eliminate those elements, like the Galilean mountain scene, in favor of a more controlled narrative. It's like he's editing history to suit a new political reality.
But doesn't that raise questions about the integrity of these gospel accounts? I mean, if one is editing history to serve an agenda, what does that say about the others?
That's a very good point, and I think it's something scholars continue to debate. Luke's approach suggests rather strongly that history isn't just a straightforward recounting of events. It's also a medium for theological and political persuasion.
Yeah, exactly. It really makes you wonder about the balance between historical reporting and theological messaging.
Right. It's like, the resurrection becomes a canvas on which the early church painted its vision for the future. By rooting Christianity in Jerusalem, Luke was not only asserting historical credibility but also redefining the identity and structure of the church.
I see that. And when we look at this from a modern perspective, it also challenges us to consider how narratives change as communities evolve, doesn't it?
Absolutely, that's a big part of it. History is always being rewritten in some form or another to meet the needs of the moment. Luke's version reflects the church's transitional phase from a small, fractured community into a burgeoning institution that needed legitimacy and order.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like updating an old software to meet new security standards. You keep the core functionality, but change the interface to be more user-friendly and, well, compliant with modern demands.
Oh, that's a neat analogy. It's like Luke was optimizing the resurrection story's user interface for a more structured and authoritative experience.
Yeah, exactly. But I wonder, do you think that in doing so, Luke might have watered down some of the radical, transformative power of the original resurrection message?
That's a really interesting critique. On one hand, by reducing the apocalyptic frenzy, the narrative becomes more palatable to the power structures of the time, ensuring survival and spread. On the other hand, yes, it might lose some of its raw, revolutionary edge.
True. So it's a trade-off between ensuring political and social acceptance versus maintaining a pure, radical experience of the divine.
Precisely. And that's what makes the resurrection account so layered. Each gospel reflects a different community's struggles and aspirations. Luke's version is, in many ways, a narrative engineered to bring stability and order to an emerging institution.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to see how a single event can be recrafted to serve so many different purposes: historical, theological, even political.
It really is. Luke's work shows us that history is much more than a fixed record. It's malleable and often tailored to fit the evolving needs of a community. That's the enduring legacy of this resurrection rewrite.
Absolutely, it gives us plenty to think about. And there you have it, a deep dive into how one narrative transforms as it serves its time. Thanks for joining this conversation. It's been quite the journey.
Thanks so much for the insightful back and forth. Catch you all next time for another exploration of fascinating historical turns.